It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the ViewSonic XG2401. I've done a couple of these video reviews before. This is my third one, and generally people seem to really quite like them, but I have been told by a couple of people that they might appreciate them being a little bit shorter, because I can waffle on for about half an hour and it can sort of switch people off a bit, so I'm going to try and make this a bit quicker. As usual, it's really just a summary review. It complements the written reviews, which are very extensive, very comprehensive. It's not designed to replace them. So there is a written review that's linked to in the description section of the video, which is well worth a read if you're interested in this monitor. But hopefully this video will just give you some sort of idea of what to expect from the monitor. So it has a, as I've mentioned, 24-inch TN panel. It's an AUO panel, AU Optronics panel. It's been used by pretty much every other 24-inch 144Hz monitor that's been released. So, you know, it's been used for a few years now. There was a slightly earlier revision of the panel that was used in the earlier models, but it's been replaced by a V80 version, which this uses. The panel itself, it's not exactly the best panel in terms of image quality, but it's, as long as it's set up properly, then it's pretty decent. And that's one of the nice things about this monitor. A lot of the BenQ XL series monitors, the Asus VG248QE for example, uses the same panel or a very similar panel, but the gamma is set so low that everything just looks completely washed out. The nice thing about this model is the out-of-the-box gamma. Sorry, I'm going to get rid of that snake because I know some people don't like snakes, but everyone likes butterflies. Yes, so the gamma of this, it's averages just above 2.2, so it's pretty much where it should be, at least in the centre of the screen. Being a twisted pneumatic panel, you do get weakening saturation further down the screen as the perceived gamma changes, and also further up the screen things become more saturated. But on the whole, this does give a rich look to the image. It's not washed out in the way that lots of other 24-inch gaming monitors are, thanks to the gamma handling. So that's a nice thing. You know, I'm not supplying any ICC profiles or anything like that in the review because they're not really great for gaming monitors anyway. They're designed for use on the Windows desktop, and this monitor frankly doesn't need them. So that's definitely a big plus. I'm going to talk a bit more about the image quality in-game, and of course the main thing that most people will be interested about in this monitor is the responsiveness, which I can tell you is very good. I mean, I've used lots of 144Hz monitors like this before, and you know, they're often pretty fast, but sometimes there are certain compromises that are made to get them to that state. And this monitor actually gives what I'd call quite a clean performance. So on this video you're not going to be able to see what I'm actually seeing. It's only a 50 frames per second video. You're not going to be able to see what I'm seeing when I look at this monitor. Same goes for the image quality. The colours are not going to be the same. They're going to be reflecting your own monitor and what's captured on the camera. But when you just on the desktop, the first thing you notice is the felt responsiveness, the latency is very low indeed when you've got it set to 144Hz. It has 3 different input lag settings. I've gone through this in the written review and also in the OSD video, but I use the ultra fast setting for input lag, not to be confused with the ultra fast response time setting, and that's a separate setting, and it doesn't have any negative consequence on image quality, but it does mean the input lag, or the signal delay, which is sort of the bit of input lag you can feel, is really low, and it's really nice to have that for a gaming monitor. Another thing I like is the fact that the pixel responsiveness is very good, especially at high frame rates and high refresh rates, 144Hz being optimal here. So often when I would observe these UFOs on this kind of monitor, you'd see the image itself looks quite sharp, has reasonable focus, much better in that respect than a 60Hz monitor. That's because the perceived blur is much lower, your eye movement is lower. There's an article on responsiveness on the website which covers that in a lot more detail, and the written review covers it in a little bit of detail. But you'd also see an element of the pixel responses, and generally on gaming monitors the pixel responsiveness is really good. Very strong overdrive is used to speed them up, but as a consequence you'll see overshoot or inverse ghosting behind objects. And it's not just when you're looking at a little test like this, it's also when you're playing games. And the BenQ XL series with the AMA, Advanced Motion Acceleration, they're notorious for having some real issues with this, but really put some users off. This monitor, however, it gives a really clean performance. It has like a tiny sort of whiff of trailing behind the object. Again, you're not going to be able to see in the video, so I'm just going to have to explain what I'm seeing. But it's as good as invisible, and you don't get any overshoot at all. I haven't observed any overshoot, not just on this test, but on a broad range of different pixel transitions when gaming, so that's really excellent. So I'm going to stop boring you to death with this test and the desktop, because that's not what this gaming monitor is about. So I'll fire up some games and talk a bit more about what I observe. I'm now on Operation Metro on Battlefield 4, and I'm at a good place to talk a bit about the contrast of the monitor. The first thing you notice, or the first thing that I notice anyway, is that the monitor uses a matte anti-glare screen surface, a regular matte anti-glare screen surface, or medium some people might call it. That's a sort of middle ground. It's not as light as some screen surfaces. For example, high resolution IPS type monitors and VA monitors tend to use lighter screen surfaces which have a smoother surface texture as well. But it doesn't have the sort of heavy smeary grain that you see on some monitors either. But certainly when I'm looking, again this won't come across in the video, but when I'm looking at lighter shades such as the lights there, and to an extent the ceiling of the Metro as well, you can see a certain graininess. It doesn't look particularly smooth. It's something that we discuss in the review, but the written review, but also in our matte versus glossy monitors article. The point in this surface is to cut down glare. No one wants to game and see their face whilst they game. They want to be focusing on the content on the monitor instead. So it handles glare very effectively. So that's light striking the screen surface from your room. You don't get nasty reflections or sort of troubles like that. But the light emitted from the monitor itself undergoes exactly the same diffusion process as the light that strikes the screen, so you do get a decrease in clarity as a result of this. But as I've said, it's not really too bad. It's a sort of a middle ground. So the other aspect of contrast which you can possibly see in the video, I'm not entirely sure, is, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that the perceived gamma on the screen changes depending on which part of the screen you're looking at. So from a normal viewing position, which the camera is showing you more or less, you can actually see a lot less detail at the top of the screen than you can at the bottom. So if I move my character up so that this part of the screen is shown near the bottom, you can actually see sort of scratches and lots of little details on that. If you calibrated it to 2.2 gamma, you actually calibrate the center, and the gamma is lower down the screen, it's lower, and higher up the screen, it's higher. So you might have it perfectly calibrated in the center, but being a TN panel and with the viewing angle restrictions, it has a lower perceived gamma lower down, higher perceived gamma higher up. So those scratches are a bit less visible towards the center, which is supposedly how they're supposed to look, and then towards the top of the screen you can't really see them at all. that what this monitor doesn't have, which many people of course will appreciate, is IPS glow or anything like that. So the corners of the screen, it doesn't have this kind of bloom, this haze, which I know some users absolutely hate. So, you know, there's pros and cons of this panel type, definitely, when it comes to contrast. I'm now going to fire up a more interesting level, so I can talk a bit about colour, and obviously I can talk a bit about the responsiveness of the monitor as well. I'm now sitting in the US base of Caspian Border. There's not a lot going on because I'm just on my own on the server, so I can actually talk about it without getting killed. The image looks pretty vibrant. It's again, it's a lot more rich than you generally see on monitors using this panel, and that's because the gamma's set up quite nicely. And as a result, you see some nice deep blue sky, some pretty decent rich greens, autumnal browns, that kind of thing. And as I've mentioned, the colour, the saturation does weaken further down the screen because of the gamma handling, the perceived gamma changes, and it's stronger higher up the screen. And you're not going to be able to see this on the video. It's very unlikely to come across on the video, and it's not a huge sort of issue. I can just see that these greens look fairly, I wouldn't say washed out, but they look a bit more faded than they ideally would further down the screen. But if I move my character and further up the screen, or I look at the same greens further up the screen, they're a lot richer. And obviously the lighting's different as well, which doesn't help in this particular example. But, you know, when you're actually playing the game, you're not really too likely to notice much of that. The main focal point of the screen has good gamma handling and a good richness to the colours, so it's quite good. And the fluidity, the responsiveness is just excellent on this title. So again, you're not going to be able to see this in the video, but as I move my mouse around, I feel really connected to the game. It feels like my interactions are being turned into action on the game very quickly, which is really nice. And you can see at the top right, I've got the frame rate counter up. It's more or less at 144, 144 frames a second. There are some fluctuations, and because this monitor has AMD Freesync, and I have an AMD GPU that supports FreeSync, the monitor has adaptive sync and therefore supports FreeSync, I should say. It's to me, it remains very smooth looking and smooth feeling, even when the frame rate drops a bit below that. You know, I don't know if you can see it going down to 139 every now and then, 140. But I should mention, I'm just going to change the options a bit. So if I turn on some anti-aliasing, and I could change the resolution scale, but I'm going to leave that for now. So it's now around 100 frames a second, and this does give more perceived blur. You know, when I'm at 144 frames a second, there's very little perceived blur. There's obviously some, because it's a sample and hold display, and anyone who knows what that means will know that there's going to be a bit of perceived blur anyway, but it's pretty low. At 100, you do get a bit more perceived blur, and the felt latency, you know, the connected feeling's not quite as good as it is at higher refresh rates and frame rates. But what I don't get is I don't get stuttering and I don't get tearing because it's got AMD FreeSync active. And certainly I notice on this game when I'm quite happy for the frame rate to as long as it's sort of in the three figures, so 100 frames a second plus, I can generally game very happily. Whereas on a monitor without FreeSync, or this monitor with FreeSync disabled, or a monitor without G-Sync, another alternative for NVIDIA users, you know, I find the stuttering and the tearing really bothersome. So bothersome that I'd actually change the settings so that I can match the refresh rate with the frame rate of the game. But obviously this monitor dynamically adjusts its refresh rate to match the frame rate for you, which is really nice. Definitely a good gaming feature. So if I increase this resolution scale a bit, and therefore the monitor starts the graphics card upscales and stuff like that. So now you can see it's about 50 frames a second. And although the monitor does have FreeSync, and that still works at this particular frame rate, it does not have the same connected feeling. Just because it's a 144Hz monitor, and obviously if it's got FreeSync on, it's now a 51Hz monitor, but it doesn't matter. You don't get the same connected feeling if the frame rate isn't high. And 50 frames a second is 50 frames a second, regardless of if you've got FreeSync or not. So it's not ideal. It's not really where I want to be with this monitor. But then again, you don't get stuttering, you don't get tearing, and such artifacts are really obvious at this kind of frame rate as well. So it's definitely a nice feature, FreeSync is, in my view. And in the written review, I actually look at the pixel responsiveness in quite a bit of detail using Test UFO and other things. And I do note that at lower frame rates, the pixel responsiveness doesn't seem to cope quite as well, or it gives more obvious trailing for the monitor. Again, you're not going to be able to see this on the video, but to be honest, even with this, it's the trailing's, I can see a bit behind that which shouldn't be there. It's not just perceived blur due to eye movement, it's also some weaknesses from the monitor, and these aren't there at higher frame rates, higher refresh rates. So it's basically optimized pretty nicely for higher refresh rates and frame rates. But if you do happen to have your frame rates drop because of the FreeSync, it will handle them nicely. It's not where you want to be, but it's better than the alternative of not having a variable refresh rate technology. So to make sure this video is not horrendously long and I'm not boring you too much, I'll get back onto my desktop and wrap this up now. So the ViewSonic XG2401, it uses a panel that I've used on several different monitors before. It's a 24-inch TN panel, full HD, so it's not going to wow you with pixel density. And again, because it's a TN panel, you're going to expect it to have a few flaws with its colour reproduction. But I think this is probably one of the better, if not the best, monitors I've actually seen using this panel, and that's largely because ViewSonic set it up nicely. I wouldn't say they set it up perfectly out of the box. Definitely need to reduce the brightness, and I had to change the colour channels a bit. But at least in terms of gamma handling, I think they've got it pretty much spot on. It helps the image look quite rich. It doesn't have that sort of universal washed out look that you get with some monitors that use this same panel. Because of the viewing angle limitations, from a normal viewing position you do lose saturation further down the screen and get a bit of extra saturation further up the screen, but overall it gives a nice rich image. And of course the responsiveness, which is what many people will really be wanting this monitor for, is in my view really good. There's very little input lag, the signal delay is as good as non-existent, so it feels really nice and responsive at the higher frame rates. The pixel responsiveness is well tuned, especially at the higher frame rates. It doesn't give you any sort of obvious overshoot or inverse ghosting. There's pretty much no additional trailing on top of what you'd ideally see. So it's it really ticks a lot of boxes in terms of responsiveness. And then added to that, you've got support for Amd Freesync. So if you've got a compatible AMD GPU, you've got the variable refresh rate technology, which cuts out the tearing and the stuttering that could be perceived if you've got the frame rate refresh rate mismatches. So that's really, I see that as a really nice bonus. But even for NVIDIA users, I would definitely consider this monitor, given the price. I know it's a little bit more expensive than some alternatives, but I think you do kind of get what you pay for in this respect. I should also mention, I've talked a bit about what the monitor's like switched on and what it's like to use when gaming, and it's really quite good. I didn't really talk much about the aesthetics of the monitor and the features, so I think I'll just include a little section on that just before I wrap this up completely. I've opened the curtain, so I've got a nice bit of light in this room so I can show you the monitor, the external. It's a bit it's easy to get carried away with these video reviews, especially when I'm doing them. I like to just use the monitor and talk about what I see, but I appreciate that some people like to know what the monitor itself actually looks like on the outside. So it has these red accents around the stand, so it's matte black plastic. It's actually glossy at the sides. I don't notice that much, to be honest. It's also matte red stripe there, matte red. So, you know, it has accents. It's quite usual for gaming monitors to have a few coloured accents. I don't find them distracting. I know not everyone likes red. It sort of identifies it as an AMD monitor, but again, if you are an NVIDIA user, I'd definitely still consider this monitor. It's, the bezels aren't super thin. The panel used sort of limits what they can do there, but they're not massively thick either. It's a fairly solidly built, robust monitor. You can see the fully adjustable stand there. You can pivot the monitor, put it into portrait, although with the panel used, you probably don't want to do that. I'm now going to show you a photo of the rear of the monitor. It's just easier than actually showing you the rear of the monitor because it's all plugged in and on my desk here. You can see those red accents again. There's a matte black plastic which is a different texture here and here, different texture to the rest. The included stand has a little retractable headphone hook as well at the back. It's actually not particularly, it doesn't go out very far, so if you've got a sort of chunky headset like mine, it's not really much good, but I can still actually, I might as well show you, I can actually just put that over the stand neck there anyway, which is quite nice. It's, you can just pull that out. For some reason it seems to be jammed. There we go. So it doesn't really go out far enough for me to just put them there, but they can just hover over the stand anyway, so that's nice little feature. The stand attaches by 100 by 100mm VESA, however you want to say it. Has little screws there. You can unscrew it and attach it to your own VESA compatible stand or mount if you prefer. The ports of the monitor at the rear face downwards. You got two HDMI 1.4 ports, DisplayPort 1.2A, which supports AMD FreeSync, supports adaptive sync, and you got a couple of USB 3 ports plus upstream and a 3.5mm headphone jack. So I definitely recommend this monitor for people who are interested in a relatively affordable 24-inch Full HD gaming monitor. If you want to enter into the world of FreeSync, it's definitely an excellent choice. And if you've got an NVIDIA graphics card and you can't even use FreeSync, I'd still recommend it, because I feel that the image quality is just a bit beyond alternatives I've seen using this panel. Hope you've enjoyed this video review. Be sure to read the full written review if you are interested in this monitor. It goes into a lot more detail, and there's a link to that in the description on this video. And if you are interested in purchasing the monitor, be sure to look at the bottom of that review for a link to purchase it in a way which supports the work that I do on the website and that my colleagues do with that as well. So thank you for watching.